All right, welcome. Let me share the screen again, but on the screen as you're joining us, the check-in question is, how do you like to express care? We've heard hugs, we've heard cooking for people. I think I like to buy gifts, just small gifts, not big gifts. If you want to be my friend now, that's okay. I'll understand. They just want a gift. That's cool. But welcome. It's nice to see so many friendly faces. The reason why I'm asking that question is because it's related to the framework that we're going to hear a little bit more about, the developmental relationships framework. So expressing care is part of that. So memes are always good. Phone calls. I like phone calls. I think in this day and age of texting and whatnot, we sometimes lose sight of like how awesome it can be to just hear someone's voice. We forget that part. So, well, welcome. I'm going to get us started. And I'm going to ask Lauren, who is joining us. Thank you, Lauren Miller, remembering important events and following up. That is lovely. Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate that. Lauren, if you could, just because I'm sharing the screen here, if you wouldn't mind celebrating wins, big and small, I love it. Thank you, Catherine. If you wouldn't mind making sure that as friends join the waiting room, just letting them in, feel free to admit them, or any of our co-hosts, feel free to let them in, because I was trying to watch that and it's hard to watch that and do this other part, which is going to be to kick off the slideshow. So, oh, Taylor, bringing or baking treats or favorite snacks. I love it. Okay, so I am Kelly McMahon, and I have the real honor and pleasure, Kelly McMahon from the Carnegie Foundation, and I have the pleasure of presenting on behalf of the GRAD Partnership organizing members. And the GRAD Partnership is made up of a big collection of organizations, as you see on the screen here, that are all coming together to work on student success systems, which I'll say our mission in a moment, but would love to hear who's with us in the room. So if you want to, just send a private message to a chat, or feel free to like say hello to people in the larger chat. This is a chance to, some of you have already been using the chat, we really like it, but also throughout the session, please feel free to use that chat as a way to connect with whatever the speakers are saying, at places to ask questions or share resources. However, we want people to use the chat to continue the conversation when we're not necessarily getting a chance to talk in the larger room, but we want to use that chat and leverage the fact that we're on Zoom, and it's a nice way for us to connect. So take a moment, say hi to someone. And then, like I said, this is our mission. So the GRAD Partnership's mission is partnering with communities to use high quality student success systems so that schools are empowered to graduate all students ready for the future. It's really based on a lot of the powerful work about the power of predictive indicators. We know resoundingly that ninth grade on-track student achievement, which is oftentimes earning enough credits to be promoted on time to the sophomore year, is the single best predictor of whether a student will graduate from high school within 4 years, more so than test scores, family income, or race and ethnicity. There's a lot of power in the predictive power of what we think of as ninth grade on track and the different ways that that's measured. And so getting a chance to leverage that, student success systems are organizing a school community to better support the academic progress, high school graduation, post-secondary success rates, and well-being of all students. And they combine 4 important elements, focusing on the strength of relationships, real-time actionable data, a lot of the on-track data, but also other data, including early warning indicators, things like attendance, behavior, and course grades, as well as some of the other important data, holistic data like student voice that we're going to hear more about today. And then also measures of students' agency, belonging, connectedness. We know these things matter for achievement, and also just how connected students feel to school. And then strategic improvement actions, and all of this shaped by student-centered mindsets. So I'll just talk briefly. We know that these supportive community relationships, we'll hear more about that today. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but we know that these really matter for how students connect with school. Holistic real-time actionable data. So this is also, schools are data-rich environments, but it's also like, do the right people have the right data that they can use in ways to be responsive to their students and to create those kind of learning conditions. So part of this is also making sure we have the right data in the right hands and in ways that people can access it and use it. And then having an improvement system in place. So data is useful, but only as useful as we make it. And that includes the ways in which we organize ourselves and the routines that we create and the conditions that we create. A lot of times think about the ways that our teams are using the data, and then the continuous improvement approaches and tools that we're using to respond. So really thinking about some of those principles of improvement science, how well are we being problem focused and user centered and responding to that data? Do we see the system that we're working in? Are we attending to variability? And then how are we tracking and monitoring the changes that we're making to know what's working for whom and under what conditions? So these are some of our improvement systems. And then, who we are and how we show up in those spaces really matters. So having student focused responsive instead of, proactive instead of responsive mindsets, problem focused, continuing to ask how might we to make sure that we're serving our students when we're not seeing it. So all of that together is integrated. So we really think about these things, these pieces as working together in a student success system. It's not on top of, it's not in place of, but it is part of the work of thinking about how we're responding to making sure that our students are on track to graduate. We have a community of practice here, so thank you all for being here. It's great to see so many friendly faces. The purpose of our community of practice is to really connect people who want to implement, improve, and innovate their student success systems. We want to enable shared learning, so that's what this space is about, is a place to like foster us to learn, to get better together. We want to generate motivation and inspiration, and we are defined by our mutual engagement to promote student success systems. So our community agreements, I'll just leave these on the screen for a minute. And if you want to pick one of these that you want to just really hold today, I'll explain a couple of them. But as I'm doing that, if you want to pick one, that would be great. This space is a we, not me. So we know that we're better together. So trying to make sure that we're creating space to learn from each other. We want to accept non-closure. We're going to talk about a lot of really big things here in 1 hour, and it's likely that these conversations will continue. We may not solve all the problems, but we're in that space here to learn. We may not close everything, but we'll continue those conversations. Use the ideas, but keep the details in the community. Sometimes, and this is particularly true from improvement standpoint, some of the best learning happens from failures. So when people may share those, we want to make that a safe space to do it, that we keep those details here. But use the ideas, but not necessarily like call out like, oh, those Carnegie people, they also have a really hard time with PDSAs. That's not particularly helpful. Instead, we might say something like PDSAs are really hard to do. And it's hard to help support people with doing them well. Share to learn. And so sometimes our learning can be unpolished, and that's okay. We learn things when we share that. People around us learn things from our sharing. So we encourage it and then make room for joy. Hopefully you found a couple there that you could hold on to. All right. And with that, it's the important part of the community practice. I'm really excited to invite our guests who are here today. Excuse me. We have Erica Van Steenis, Catherine Ross, and Mara Schanfeld. They're going to say their names better than I did. But we're really excited to have them. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I'm not sure who's taking the show from here, but let me pass it off.
Kelly, thank you. My name is Mara Schanfeld from the Search Institute. And Kelly, thank you not only for the opportunity, but just for how you hold space. It is authentic, it is beautiful. You encourage people to send messages in the private chat, so I was really working on that. Seeing some folks that I know, and I'm just really delighted to be here. And thank you to the whole GRAD partnership team. It's particularly special for me to be here because I've worked really closely with many of you. Hi, Megan. Hi, Marie. I really respect the work of this group, and I'm excited to dive in here today. I'm here with Erica and Catherine, who you'll meet in a moment. And I'm willing to bet that everyone who's here today has two very important things in common. One, I bet everyone here believes in the power of relationships. And two, I bet that we're all in the business of helping educators strengthen the relationships in their environments and make the best decisions that they can with the strongest evidence possible. So just a quick show of hands or chat or emoji, whatever you prefer, of who is familiar with Search Institute and the work of developmental relationships and developmental assets. Bar folks, I know you are. So that's one no. Yes. All right, great. We're a nonprofit. We're a small nonprofit. We've been around for a long time, 60 years or so. We're based here in Minneapolis, and we care a lot about young people. We also care about practitioners who serve young people. And so we conduct applied research on positive youth development, and we help youth serving organizations use data to strengthen relationships. Our team really just commends the work of GRAD Partnership. As I said, we wholeheartedly agree that student success systems need to include and sort of be predicated on strong relationships, actionable data, student-centered mindsets, and be driven by improvement science. So you'll get to hear a little bit more about how we're doing that through student success systems in a moment when I turn it over. But first, I want to get to know you guys a little bit. Next slide, please. So just starting here with the basic premise of nobody grows alone. As you know, in order for humans to develop and reach our full potential, we need to be surrounded by others who help us grow, become who we are meant to be uniquely. And we need to be surrounded by nurturing relationships because learning and growth are social processes. Development is influenced by the environment. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but I'm repeating it because it's important. And strong relationships, of course, are vital to survival, but to learning and then to thriving. And so we like to think about it as a whole spectrum. And how do you define youth? Well, it depends. Maybe everyone's young at heart. So even as we age, the power of relationships for health and healing can't be underestimated. So quick question, if you hit enter, we'd like to know from you, how do you think of strong relationships? What are the indicators that come to mind, or how do you measure them in your environment? How do you assess? If you don't, what do you wish you did, or what do you want to do? Or measures that you would love to wave a magic wand for? You put that in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute your mic as well. Many states have school climate surveys. Some cities, some districts have their own. Curious, what ways do you all currently measure the strength of relationships, if you do? Great. As you're thinking about that, next slide, please. I asked a local nonprofit leader, thanks Sandhya for your response. I asked him how does he know if his program is working in terms of the relationship richness of his organization. And he said, if people feel comfortable calling me like at a weird time and asking for something, I know it's working. So yeah, thanks. Street data, beautiful. Great. Next slide, please. So at Search, we use, many of you may know, we assess school connectedness and supportive relationships using the developmental relationships framework. We like to use the phrase rooted in relationships because, like a tree, with a well-developed root system, a young person who is grounded in strong relationships can gain stability, connection, encouragement, guidance, access to opportunities, all of these ingredients for thriving. We define developmental relationships in a particular way, which is on the screen here, around close connections that help you become who you are, meant to be, gaining abilities, shaping your own life, being able to contribute to the greater good. We'll put a handout in the chat with some more detail around each of the 5 elements here, because we want you to have that, and happy to dive into that, but we wanted to get to the example here. What I will say last here is that we're often asked about the connection between developmental relationships and developmental assets, which many of you are familiar with. I'd like to say that simply DRs, developmental relationships, build DAs, developmental assets. What I really mean is that the developmental assets framework articulates the broad ecology of youth development. It highlights the need for external assets, meaning all the aspects of the community that support positive development, while also lifting up the internal assets. So thinking about the innate cultivated strength of humans, young people in particular. So the developmental relationships framework differs in that it really is more focused on the potential of relationships within and across all the contexts to contribute to individual and collective agency. So both external assets and developmental relationships come from the world around us, help us prepare to address structural barriers and strengthen our own internal assets. So I will pause there here with the larger theoretical piece, because I want to get into practice. Your questions are welcome in the chat here. There are many viable ways to assess relationships. Thanks for your participation as well. And when we look at assets, relationships, connectedness, conditions, there's lots of ways to measure that. So it's really now my pleasure to pass the mic to Erica and Catherine, my brilliant colleagues, who will paint really a picture of what this looks like in a school.
Thanks, Mara. Kelly, you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, we're going to tell you about a project called the Cultural Adaptation of Developmental Relationships, which we call CADRE for short project. And Mara set the scene by telling you a lot about sort of our conceptual framework around developmental relationships. And we've done a lot of research on developmental relationships, and Search Institute has found that students who have strong developmental relationships with educators, with adults, so you can think educators used really broadly. A lot of folks go to teachers, but we're also thinking about youth workers or folks who work in out of school time settings or people who hold roles in schools or out of school settings. And so we know when youth have strong relationships with adults, they're more likely to show signs of positive development. And studies that we've done have showed that academic motivation increases, engagement increases, students or youth tend to have a greater sense of school belonging and increased social emotional growth in learning. You can go to the next slide. And we also know that when we collect data on developmental relationships, we know that there is often a large gap between what adults report doing and what youth report experiencing. And there typically is that adults have really wonderful intentions and they do so much to build relationships. And for whatever reason, sometimes young people are not experiencing those developmental relationships elements in the same way. And so we wonder, if you go to the next slide, Kelly, why that might be the case and what barriers educators might be facing or adults might be facing to building relationships with students. And CADRE is intended to do that work and to help think alongside. It's a project that really positions Search Institute in partnership with school teams in order to really dig into why might that variability or that gap in how adults versus the young people are experiencing relationships be occurring. And CADRE is an implementation approach. We're taking an improvement science lens to the work and pairing it with an evaluation study. And we're really trying to build capacity alongside of school teams to assist in their building even more intentional, inclusive, and equitable relationships with their students. And the approach provides professional development on understanding and adapting the developmental relationships framework to be more responsive to the student and community needs. It aids in implementation of the developmental relationships framework and really is centered on relationship building practices and using the developmental relationships survey to gauge perceptions towards relationships. And then it also provides a suite of tools to monitor continuous improvement. I'm going to kick it over to Catherine.
Hey, so you can go to the next slide. So this is our logic model, which kind of is a roadmap for what this project looks like over time of Search's partnership with a given school. So you can see on the left-hand side is the process of study and the right-hand side is the evaluation study. So I should say alongside this project, we are researching every step along the way. So in the process study, that's really the steps that we're taking together with the schools and the school team. And you can see we start in this phase that we call prepare. And in Prepare, we are working with schools to understand what resources and capacity already exist within the building. What things are you already doing to build relationships with students? And what types of information do you already have? So we know most schools are collecting a lot of data that we can tap into and sort of use to inform the process. And then we're also forming a school team. So identifying a group of individuals that will work closely with us to come up with a plan together. And in most cases, those individuals are educators, school staff, parenting adults, community members, and also youth, to be representative of the different perspectives that make the school community succeed. And then we move to the plan stage, and that's really where the school teams are participating in learning about the developmental relationships framework and having an equity mindset in schools. And they're working closely with us in kind of engaging in a learning management system, and then also meeting with us monthly to think about how we can apply those learnings in their everyday work. And they're co-designing a school-wide plan for how they'll improve developmental relationships in their building based off of the information that we collect with them using the Developmental Relationships Survey and their existing school survey. And then after that, we move to the implementation phase, and that's where we help them in implementing a full school approach in delivering their plan that we come up with together and in adopting that. And ultimately, we will evaluate the success of this. And the aims of the overall project are improving relationships and equitable practices, improving school relational climate, and improving teacher and student success and well-being ultimately. You can go to the next slide. So for those who like sort of the nitty-gritty of all of the variables that we'll be looking at in the study, this is our more detailed logic model that gets into each of those processes. I'd be happy to talk with folks in more detail about that if they're really interested. But the important thing to note here is that right now we're in this process study phase of things, which is really the first three columns: input, activities, and process goals that we're focusing on. And that really is aimed at improving knowledge and skills related to developmental relationships, knowledge and skills related to equity, and developing that school-wide plan that they can adopt and implement. So you can move to the next slide. So this highlights the variables that we'll be studying in the process study, which is what we're really focusing the application portion of the presentation on here today. And so we're going to have you all pretend that you're a school team and walk through this process with us, where we collect data and bring it back to the school and really process that together and think about how do we put this relationship data to work and how can it be used to improve practices, inform goals, strengths, and gaps that are existing within the data, and how it might help us come up with a concerted effort towards relationship building. So we can move to the next slide. So we're actually going to use some example data that we have from a school district. And you can see this is a description of the student population that participated in the Developmental Relationships Survey. So this was 826 students across middle schools. And so they're ages 10 to 15 years old. You can see that they're quite diverse in terms of their racial representation within the school. If you move to the next slide, you can see, consistent with what we see pretty standard across the country, the staff participation rates here, you can see that the racial composition is not quite as diverse as the student composition. And so this really presents us with some interesting information. So I'll go to the next slide, and I will pass it to Erica to describe our activity for today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Catherine. So I also, just for maybe wondering minds, put a little brief overview of what the Developmental Relationship Survey is in the chat. I'm realizing we didn't dive too deeply into that. And you can find information about it on the Search Institute website, but it is a self-report youth-facing survey, and it really is meant to capture youth perceptions of what's going on in terms of relationships. So we collect data from adults in the school, and then also, or in the setting, in the context, and also from adults. And so when you look at this data, keep in mind, as we set up this activity, keep in mind that both adults and young people took this survey or took an iteration of the survey. And the data that you're seeing is mostly going to be youth perceptions, but you will look a bit at a comparison between how youth and adults are reporting in this particular setting. So we had made 8 groups, but we're not going to break it into that many groups. We're going to break into 4 groups, I'd say. And groups 1 and 2 on page 6, or groups 1 and 2 and groups 3 and 4, you're going to refer to a handout that Lauren is putting right now in the chat. So please go ahead and download that. And you're going to each be looking at a chunk of data. So groups 1 and 2, you're going to look at page 6 of the handout, and groups 3 and 4, you're going to look at page 7. Now, any group is welcome to look at any data. We just wanted to draw your attention to a particular place, but please feel free to toggle around. There's 4 different data displays that you can explore. And what we want you to do is to just review the data on your assigned page and discuss it, and be ready to share out. And we want you to discuss the questions that are on the slide, but they're also in the handout. So we are wondering about what you're noticing as you look at the data. What is jumping out to you? Does anything seem surprising? Does anything seem aligned with your experience? And we also want you to talk about what you're wondering. So what questions does the data raise for you? And what other information might you need to answer the questions that you have? And so we're going to break out, or does anybody have any questions before we break out, just to make sure those directions were clear? Okay.
Erica, can I just ask a question? How often do people typically give out the survey?
Oh, how often? Yeah, so
I'm sure it varies, but
it just depends. Yeah, I think it's a big depends. In the case of CADRE, we are going to administer this survey 4 times, right, Catherine?
Yes, once a semester.
okay, thank you.
Yes, some folks don't use it as, like, some folks treat it as baseline, and then we'll want to take it again to see if there's been an improvement. But a lot of folks just do it one time or maybe once a year. Or yeah, Mara, anything to add about that, or Catherine?
Because it measures relationships, you want to make sure that you're not doing the first day of school. And so, we suggest like in the fall is a good time if people are trying to do it annually.
And every time that you're administering it, don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but are you doing adults alongside the students every time? Okay, makes sense, but wanted to clarify. Awesome.
Yes, thank you, Meg.
Yeah, and I know the rabbit hole, and I'll just say there's the developmental relationships measures, but we also have a few other things we can measure as part of this bigger conversation, like social emotional competencies, equitable practices, school climate. And when we work with schools or after school programs, we really think alongside of them about what exactly they want to be measuring. And so they might pick, 3 different things to measure, and so it can be comprehensive as well, or more comprehensive than just the DR focus. Great. Might be breakout room ready.
Thanks, Lauren. I am gonna stop sharing here. And I'm gonna pause the recording right now. Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah.
Hello, welcome back. Welcome back. Hopefully you didn't get cut off mid-sentence. Hi, Marie, it's nice to see you. I know we had some folks drop out. Is this all, or is there, this can't be all the rooms. Okay.
They're still coming back.
That's a lot. It's a lot of people dropping out. Well, I'm going to look to my search colleagues. Would you like me to put the slides back up now, or do you want to allow folks to we can just have conversation What would you prefer?
Yeah, Kelly, either way, that's fine.
Here,
I would love to hear what did you talk about? In particular, how might this data drive decision making, and what do you want to do about it, or what would you want to learn more about? We had a great conversation. Thanks to Lansing and where did I go? Marta, I think I don't say your names right, but I hope you'll correct me.
I really appreciated looking at the data alongside the framework. So being able to possibly pinpoint where the areas of opportunity are for how we would be able to do better for our students. So having both there was like super duper helpful.
I think for me, it's just we looked at slide 6 and 7. I think why the change, why the difference by grade level. And I think who in our group, Catherine mentioned that they also look at data when it was administered to different parts in the school year. And like, it's usually higher in the fall than the spring. It's like, why is that as well? Are we front loading our supports like in 6th grade and beginning of the year, and kind of like what happens, after that? So that's something that I'm wondering as well. I also noticed that our 8th grade group in this, they're like kind of the last pandemic group, right? So with that, does that affect the data as well? Because our 6th grade are out of the pandemic, so would they feel more supported, back in person versus like our 8th grade group? So some thoughts.
Julie, those are awesome observations. I wanted to add, in this particular context, there's some interesting things happening, which is that right around the time that this survey was administered as well, there was a mass teacher layoff in this school, in the particular school. So just for a variety of reasons, and mostly because too many teachers to the student population. So, and on the school team that we work with, I'm sort of the facilitator of that school team work, and it does sometimes feel like we need a new school year, like we got to like start over. It's just feeling a little strained. And so I've also wondered, is that, I mean, this is very high inference, but I've wondered, is that a sign about how like the wider culture is sort of experiencing the school right now, or like are students feeling that too? And so I'm very excited and curious when we administer the survey again next year to see. And of course, those 8th graders won't be there anymore, but it has really also pinged some interest around, oh yeah, is there some sort of improvement work we can do, or an intervention with that transition into 8th grade or attention to 8th graders?
And out of curiosity, not to add to your research study or not, but do you follow students at all? Like, are they like administrator if you're working with the entire district, do you like then look at 9th grade, like longitudinally, do you follow students at all?
That's a great question. So for this study, we're looking at the student population as an indicator of their school. So we are following the school, not particular students. Yeah.
That makes sense. Thanks for clarifying.
In our group, there was a desire to know more and sort of unpack, like, what are the item level questions? Did that come up in other groups? What else are you wondering about?
I feel like I want to take facilitator liberty here. I want to ask a question about, because I can imagine that, there's some tough data that's in there. I think, Julie pointed out the pattern of, things seemingly getting worse for 8th graders, because you could imagine, like, the longer you are in school, if it's a school that cares about developmental relationships, like, you would think that would be inverted, but also it could be very new work. And also is that some of that myth that's coming into play of like, the older you get, the more responsible you're supposed to be. And so therefore we expect you to do more. Like, I'm not sure, there's a lot you could infer there, but I'm just curious, that conversation. And then the one about the gap between the adults and the students. Like, I think that there is, you know, that could be a really challenging conversation for, you know, if taken well, the, you know, teachers would look at that and be shocked, like, oh my gosh, what are we doing that is our students are not. But you could also imagine, you know, teachers looking at that and writing off the data, or not actually engaging the way you'd want, or there could be a lot of conflict, right? So there's that. And then a third one would be the final slide. I'm not sure if anyone looked at that, but the one that was broken out by the levels of students. And then, you know, the graph wasn't disaggregated by race, but I'd be really curious in that school if it was, and then like how the conversation would go. So here, that's a long setup, but I'm really curious about when you guys do your prepare phase work, how are you setting like the conditions such that helping teams be in a position to have those difficult data conversations? Like, what are some of the things that you do to either help them have those conditions to be in place, or things that you're looking for amongst teams to know that they could be ready for those difficult data conversations?
Waiting for you too, Catherine, maybe. We are actually, so it's a great question. And I feel like I'm having a personal journey that is a steep learning curve around this very question, Kelly. And it's in part because there's a real technical assistance piece to this, right? Or sort of like a teaming and partnership piece of this, you know, technical assistance, partnership work, co-designing, improvement, whatever, like we can name it, whatever we want that is applicable to us in our settings. It's difficult. Yeah, it's difficult work. And some of what we're doing is using different systems of looking into data. So in particular, Search Institute uses this tool called ORID. It's just one of many tools. So we really try to keep teams at the objective level just to begin with. So what are you noticing and what is like the facts of your data? And then moving them into a place around, okay, let's be really reflective about what's happening. How are we feeling? Like, does it feel crummy? Like, or does it feel good? What feels good about it? Like, what are our successes and challenges here? And then moving more into interpretation and waiting a while to make any decisions. And so trying to structure the conversation for sure. And then, yeah, a lot of trust building around building developmental relationships with the people we're working with. So and building trust and building teams that feel like, you know, we sort of have their best interest in mind. What else, Catherine and Mara, do you want to add?
Yeah, I would say the other thing to add is that collecting and presenting this data is a real bridge to schools having these difficult conversations, because a lot of times we are sort of talking to school administrators and they recognize that this is an issue, but the school hasn't quite faced it yet. And particularly when we get into looking at racial differences. So us coming in as a partner to the work and presenting the data as their students answer these questions does kind of force them to face these challenges in a new way. And so I think that really is sort of the power of us being in partnership with them and collecting data using like reliable tools that have been developed for youth to fill out. So that gives us a nice sort of entry point, even though it is difficult. It's like, this is what your students are telling us, so we can't deny it any longer.
No, I appreciate that you're having those conversations side by side. Like, here's the student results and here's your results, and like having that very structured conversation, because sometimes doesn't always happen. Like, oh, here's a student survey and here's a teacher survey, but we're not going to have those cross conversations versus just throwing it on the table and say, this is the situation. It kind of reminds me of when I'm teaching college courses, like the end of the year course evaluations, where, you know, that's where you get the real feedback from students, and that aren't necessarily connected to their grade or the hard data of the grades, but versus like, how are you actually interacting with students in the classroom? So yeah, so I think the way that you guys structure that is just really meaningful and intentional. So just great job on that.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, the last thing I'll say here, is that we take it seriously to guard the space both for the adults and the young people. So, validating the adult experience. If you are offering, you say 87% of the time you're expressing care. That is what it looks like and feels like to you. Are the young people picking up what you're putting down? And that is the conversation. And to have not, you're doing it wrong. But is it being received? And how could you improve that? What would you need to know? How could you ask people, like our check-in question earlier, right? How could you ask people how they receive the care? So in the vein of expressing care, providing support, walking the walk here, there are 2 parting gifts for you. We have 2 tools. Both are free. If you have a district email address, Along is free. And then the DR Math Toolkit is free and widely available. Both are backed by the research that we do at Search. The Along tool allows for educators and students to communicate and build relationships that way. There's prompts, things like that. And the Math Toolkit really is for a bunch of activities and places that are relevant into the math space that you can use. So we'll put those in the chat. Oh, are they already in the chat? Thank you so much. And I'll pause there and turn it back to Kelly. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Mara. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you, Erica. Would love to just have folks, if you want, in the chat, drop something that you're taking with you today, and perhaps maybe it's one of the gifts that was just passed out, or an idea or something that you want to take with you. I find that sometimes when we say it out loud or type it, then we're more likely to share it with others. So if you want to put that intention in the chat, we'd love to know who you're passing along with and who you're interacting with. I want to point us to our next community of practice. Ignore that the red thing is on May. It should be in June. It's going to be in June. It'll be June 21st. And we'll have our friends from Community Design Partners are going to join us to talk more about student empowerment. They have a student empowerment tool that they are developing. And so please join us for that. Continuing to learn together. I just also want to offer 2 opportunities from an organization called Improvement Equity by Design, which is hosted at High Tech High. They do a lot of improvement work. And there's 2 opportunities that are coming up. You can learn a little bit more about Continuous Improvement 101, and this is available for school-based folks, intermediary folks. So please feel free to share it widely if you want. And then also how to co-design with students. So they talk specifically about their work and how they co-design. So just want to pass those along. Lauren has dropped. That's the GRAD partnership events for the community things. I think there's a link for the High Tech High ones should be there too. If not, I can pass that along. And we would love your feedback. It's very important. We want to get better together. So please, there's a survey link that'll be dropped in the chat. It takes less than 3 minutes. Just would really love to hear your thoughts on the community of practice and what you're thinking and how we can get better at doing it. And with that, I would just say thank you. Thank you to our wonderful speakers. If you guys could all give them a round of applause for us. Round of applause. Thank you to Lauren for all of your help with the Zoom and the back end there. And thank you all for being here. We really are. It is better together. So thank you for your willingness to come and learn together, share your good learning. And I look forward to continuing our conversation. So have a great rest of your Wednesday and hope to see you in June.